So good morning, everybody. Just a reminder, so this is our new time for our classes, Mondays at 11:30 moving forward, unless otherwise specified. I have the Zoom on, so I look forward to continuing throughout the year. We should be getting into the book of Melachim very shortly. And, hopefully we'll do something nice for the conclusion of Shemuel, but we got to get there first. So we're up to chapter 20, Perek Kaf. We left off in chapter 19 2 weeks ago, so we'll just refresh our memories. Actually, it might be even worthwhile to read the ending of chapter 19 because it kind of flows into chapter 20. So we'll actually start from Pasuk Mem Gimal, Pasuk 43 of chapter 19, and we'll read the last two Pasukim of chapter 19. What's going on is that David is reestablishing himself as the king after he had fled from Avshalom because of the rebellion. They conduct the battle, Avshalom is killed, and now David is set to be reinstated, so to speak, as the king of all of Israel. But we noted that he took a very different path this time around in reestablishing his monarchy than the way he did when he first became king. When he first became king, David was preoccupied with uniting the Jewish people, not showing any favoritism to any one tribe over the other, in particular his home tribe, the tribe of Yehudah. He moved the capital city from Hebron, which is in Yehudah, to Yerushalayim, which straddles Yehudah and Binyamin, which is significant because he was giving sort of a token to the tribe of Binyamin, which is where Shaul came from, as like a sign, a peace offering. I'm not here to be tribal. We're going to unite all of the Jewish people together. In this go-around, as David is coming back into the Melucha, we find he takes a little bit of a different approach. He tends to emphasize his tribe, the tribe of Yehudah, this time around, and that causes some tension between the tribe of Yehudah and the other tribes, most notably Binyamin. And we handled the Shim'i ben Gera thing, which Shim'i ben Gera was cursing David. He was from the tribe of Binyamin. So you could very easily see how the rest of the tribes were a little bit skitsy about David emphasizing Yehudah, thinking he's going to maybe get back at them or something like that. Meanwhile, David wanted to emphasize Yehudah because he realized that Avshalom, his son, rallied the rebellion in Yehudah. So he said, maybe I'm not giving enough attention. So there's all these different political plays kind of tugging back and forth at each other. And this causes a lot of strife in the kingdom at this moment. So reading chapter 19, Pasuk 43, Mem Gimal. Yes.
Is it mostly Binyamin who's rallying the other tribes like revenge?
Yes, I will say yes. As you'll see in a moment, the next these are the two major tribes, Yehudah and Binyamin. Ironically enough, when the kingdom actually does split, Yehudah and Binyamin will stay together against everybody else. But right now, Binyamin's got some tension, and it makes sense because Shaul, David, Binyamin, Yehudah, there's some tension there growing between these two tribes that are neighbors right by each other. And the person who's going to make this next rebellion is from the tribe of Binyamin. Let's see. So it says, Vayan kol ish Yehudah al ish Israel. All the men of Judah replied to the men of Israel, Ki karov hamelech elai, because the king is our relative. Velama zeh haralecha. Why are you all upset about the fact that David is favoring us? Al hadavar hazeh. He'achol achalnu min hamelech im niset nisa lanu. Have we consumed anything that belongs to the king? Has he given us any gifts? We deserve this. We're his home tribe. Vaya'an ish Yisrael et ish Yehudah. The people of Israel said to the people of Yehudah, Vayomer, and they said, Eser yadot li bamelech vegam beDavid ani mimcha. We have 10 shares in the king. And in David too, we have more than you. In the end of the day, we're 10 tribes. You're only you. That's it. We have so much more, at stake over here, right? Madua hekilotani. So why have you treated us with such disrespect, so lightly? Velo haya devari rishon li lahashiv et malki. And why have you slighted us? Were we not the first to propose that our king be brought back? In other words, whose idea was it to bring David back? It was the other tribes. It was not the tribe of Yehudah. However, vayikesh devar ish Yehudah mi devar ish Israel. The men of Judah prevailed over the men of Israel. Their words were tougher and stronger than the men of Israel. So the tension is growing the feud is widening, the gap is widening, and now the stage is set for a man for somebody to take advantage of that weakness. And when you have bad people and they sense an opportunity, they pounce in there, right? Think only back to the Torah, to a person like Korah, for example. The Jewish people sin with the spies. Hashem says, you're all going to die in the desert. It's a moment of weakness. Moshe. Korah jumps on the opportunity. We should obliterate Moshe. Let's choose a new leader and let's go, right? When you have people who tend to be egotistical, narcissistic, they want to undermine and overthrow the authority, the moment there's a weakness in the armor of the authority, they jump in to try and break that wide open. And that's what the text tells us about this man. His name is Sheva ben Bichri. He senses something is afoot, and there's an opportunity here for him to start the next rebellion, and he does precisely that. So we begin chapter 20. Vesham nikra ish Belial ushmo Sheva ben Bichri ish yamini. Ish Belial is a scoundrel of a person. So we already know this is not a great guy. To take advantage of the kingdom and try to split people apart is not a good thing, right? Somebody should really come in here and say, calm the tensions, let the feud die down and try to repair the situation. But Sheva ben Bichri doesn't want that. He's a scoundrel of a person. He comes in, he's an Ish Yemini, which means he's from what tribe? He's from the tribe of Binyamin. Vayitkab b'shofar, and he blows the shofar to sound an alert to everybody. Vayomer, and he says, En lanu helek b'David, we have no portion in the kingdom of David. Velo nahala lanu b'ben Yishai, we have no portion in the son of Yishai, that's David. Ish le'ohalav Israel, every man back to his tent from Israel. We have to rally together and go against David. Vaya'al kol ish Israel me'achare David, all of the men of Israel abandoned David, achare Sheva ben Bichri, and they follow Sheva ben Bichri. Ve'ish Yehuda davku b'malkam, the men of Judah, they cling to their king, min hayarden ve'ad Yerushalayim, and accompany him from the Jordan back to the city of Yerushalayim. And lo and behold, no sooner did one rebellion with Absalom end, that David has to now contend, even before he was fully reinstated as king, with the next rebellion of Sheva ben Bichri, which makes kind of sense because, one rebellion just kind of leads to the other until the kingdom is sort of solidified. But you'd think David at this point would have squashed his detractors, one right after the other, right? And we can't help but think to ourselves, this is David's fate. This is his lot. He committed his error. He now has to live with this. And David, I'm sure, is thinking the same thing as well. Yes. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbat on Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph reads the following. I'll read it to you over here because I have it handy. The Gemara reads a statement in the name of Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav. B'sha'a she'amar David leMephibosheth. This is going back to the beginning of chapter 19, when David told Mephibosheth, the paraplegic son of Shaul, whom he did not do right by him, right? He should have returned all of the property of Shaul back to Mephibosheth because his servant Siva lied about him, right? David didn't do that. He says, the moment David told him, Ata v'tziva tahleku et hasadeh, you and Siva will split everything 50-50, which was not a fair judgment on the part of David. It should have all gone back to Mephibosheth. The minute he said they will split it, it says, Yatzta bat kol, a heavenly voice called out, Rehavam v'Yeravam yahleku et hamelucha. Yeravam, that's the man from the tribe of Ephraim who's going to tear the kingdom apart. And Rehavam, that's David's grandson, Shlomo's son, will split the melucha. In other words, once David showed sort of his colors about separating things, right, and he made this critical error, the seeds were sown for the idea that the kingdom should tear apart, and strife and tension continued to mount. And as a result, this is only the first sign of what is not too far off for us, this eventual splitting of the kingdom into two. And what's interesting about why you bring that up is because what was the language that Sheva ben Bichri used over here? In verse number 1, he said, En lanu helek beDavid velo nahala beben Yishai. We have no portion in David and no inheritance amongst Ben Yishai. Well, I'll ask you to see if you could do a little flip job over here. If you turn to the book of Kings, where the kingdom is actually split, which I believe is taking place, I think it's in chapter 13, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, chapter 12. Sorry, 12:16. Go to, it's page 829 in the English Hebrew Sachs edition. It's chapter 12 of the book of Kings, verse 16. See if you can find that. I'll give you a second to pull it. I'll pull it up over here for those watching on the Zoom. Here we go. It's the book of Kings, chapter 12, Perek Yud Bet, verse 16. Kings 1 we're in. Exactly. They use the same exact phrase, right? When the kingdom is actually ready to split because Rehavam refused to listen to his people, it says, Vayar kol Israel, the Jewish people saw, Hilo shama hamelech alehem, that the king Rehavam refused to listen to them. They came to Rehavam and they said the taxes are too high, the oppressiveness of the kingdom is too much for the citizens to bear. Lessen the burden, loosen the reins on us a little bit. Rehavam refused to listen. He needed to solidify his power, so he abused the people. When the people saw that, Vayashivu ha'am et hamelech davar lemor. The people sent word back to the king saying, Ma lanu helek beDavid velo nahala beven Yishai. We have no portion in the house of David and no inheritance amongst Ben Yishai. Le'ohalecha Yisrael. Everybody go back to your tent. It's exactly the same phrase that Sheva ben Bichri used over here is repeated later when the kingdom actually does split into two and will remain split in two until the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. It never actually reunites for the rest of time, right? So what does that tell us? It tells us that although we will see that Sheva ben Bichri's rebellion doesn't even get off the ground, we're going to see it get squashed, doesn't even hold a candle to Avshalom's rebellion. Avshalom's rebellion was tense for a few minutes. Avshalom even had the possibility of overthrowing David had he listened to Achitophel. That was a much more dangerous rebellion. This rebellion is not going to be nearly as severe. They're going to squash it very quickly. It won't even get off the ground. But what's tragic about it is it's the first time it was suggested to split the kingdom in two. And that suggestion still resonates with the people to the extent that now they know when things are not going well, there's an option to split the kingdom into two. And that seed is laid and will eventually be planted and come to fruition in the book of Kings when we get there. Eventually. We'll see what leads up to that in more detail. But that's why this is so tragic. It's not going to be a serious rebellion, but it's tragic because it suggests to the people the idea of splitting the kingdom, which will not go away. Exactly. I mean, it's when we say that on Tisha B'Av, the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Hinam. Most of us just think it's like a story here. We're talking about centuries of Jewish divide, going back to, we've never actually united 100%, right? We've had these small pockets of history in which the Jewish people have been together. But for the most part, when you look at the grand scheme of Jewish history, from when we entered the land of Israel to where we are today, the Jewish people have been divided. We've been a divided people, our whole history. Of course, since the very beginning. The book of Shoftim, we were tribal. We saw that led us to tremendous disaster. We finally got it together a little bit. Shaul, David, Shlomo, right away, that's it. We held on to it for maybe 3 kings, a few hundred years, and that's it. Right? And barely, we held on to it like, what are they? I don't know what the phrase is. Like, held by a thread, right? Not even. They're talking about David is 40 years, Shlomo is another 40 years, Rehavam immediately spread. They're talking about not less than 100 years even, that you really had the kingdom, in a sense of unite. All that time, there's still strife and turmoil. So that's been the Jewish plague. It's our own worst enemy, as you said. All those wonderful miracles that brought us together. Of course. Yeah. 100%. It's tragic to read it this way because there's so much potential here. Let's go to verse 3. All of a sudden, the text sticks in a very odd pasuk for a moment. David makes his way back to Yerushalayim. And who's the first people he greets? Remember, David has been in exile on the other side of the Jordan River. He comes in contact with those 10 concubines that he left back behind, whom Absalom disgraced them publicly. Vayavod David el beto Yerushalayim. David comes back to his palace in Jerusalem. Vayikach hamelech et eser nashim pilagshim asher hiniach lishmor habayit. The king takes his 10 female concubines whom he left to guard his palace. Vayitenem bet mishmeret vaychalkelem. And he puts them in a guarded place and he provides for them. Vaychalkelem means he sustains them. He gives them what they need to live. Va'alehem lo ba. But he's never intimate with them again from that day forward, which makes sense because his son has been intimate with them and has tainted them. And so it would be all of them. All of them, correct. Yes. So once Avshalom, David's son, has slept with all of these women, it's impossible for David to come and to be intimate with them again. So David puts them in their own spot. He provides for them, which is a chesed, but there's a tragic side to this chesed, which is that these women are basically cast aside. They remained in seclusion until the day they died in living widowhood. Essentially, they had a husband, it was David, but they're widowed from him because they can never be intimate with him. And as a result, they live as living widows, is how the text calls it. What? It doesn't seem like it. It seems like the text is portraying them in a very sympathetic way. It's basically saying that they still had some level of companionship with David. They still wanted to be able to experience intimacy, and they cannot experience intimacy with anybody else. In other words, once they've been with the king and now with the king's son, they're stuck. So they live the rest of their lives as living widows, is the language that it uses. What? No, it's not freeing them. Exactly. By law, they cannot be with anybody else because once someone's been with the king, they can't be with anybody else. But the king can't be with them because they have been tainted by the king's son. So they're stuck. They're caught between a rock and a hard place, which requires them. We feel bad for them. David does the correct thing halachically, but and he takes care of them, which is important to note. But we cannot help but also feel the bitterness of it in that had David not left them alone in the first place, we wouldn't have been stuck in this situation. So there's both a positive and a criticism aspect to what the text is portraying here from David.
It's inserted in here because you see perhaps all these men and these wars and these rebellions that have been shown this. There are innocent people who are suffering. There are casualties of war.
Correct.
That, maybe people get caught up in the
political. Right. Within the story, there's always going to be certain people who unfortunately have to bear the brunt or pay the price for different actions and decisions that are made, both good and bad. And so as the reader, we shouldn't lose sight of that fact. We should still feel the pain and sympathy for those people. So even as David is being reinstated now and has to deal with it with a rebellion, we almost don't feel totally bad for David because look at what he did, right? His decisions caused other people to have to suffer alongside him. Well, it's interesting. It's ironic because why? David left them in his house. What was their job when he left them in his house? To watch the house. And where does he now put them? Right. The word in Hebrew, by the way, was lishmor al habayit, to watch the house. Where does David put them now? He puts them in a bet mishmeret, in a watched, guarded house, which kind of tells you if David had the ability to place them in a guarded house all the while, what should he have done in the first place? He probably should have put them there to begin with, but he put them there to protect his own palace and to maintain a presence here, perhaps selfishly. They couldn't, but I don't think David ever dreamed that someone like Avshalom would do such a thing, such a heinous act. David had hoped that as long as the Pilagshim stayed there, he maintained the familial presence inside the palace. So he thought that they were not protecting, but maintaining a presence in the house. Lo and behold, it ends up backfiring on him and on the women badly. And now we see what he probably should have done in the end. He rectifies it to a degree, by putting them there now for the end of their life, but too little, too late. I would hope that it would to a degree. I think that it would. Maybe not as much. Maybe it certainly could be a bigger trigger for a female reading the story. But yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Okay, we move on now. Now we're in the throes of a full-out rebellion now. We got to figure out, or David's got to figure out how he's going to squash this rebellion now and get his grip back on the kingdom. So the first thing he does is he turns to a man by the name of Amasa. Just to refresh our memory, anybody remember who Amasa was? I know we got a lot of characters in Shemuel. Amasa was the chief general of Avshalom. And if you remember, when the war ended, David wanted to try and bridge the gap between the side of Avshalom and his own side. And he replaced Yoav with Amasa. He did that for two purposes. One was to try and bridge the gap between the rebellious side and his side. And two was to punish Yoav for not following through on his command not to kill Avshalom. And Yoav did it anyway. So he replaced Yoav with Amasa. David's decision to replace Yoav with Amasa is going to bear him some negative consequences now. Okay? Vayomer HaMelech el Amasa. The king says to Amasa, Haz'ek li et ish Yehuda sheloshet yamim. Call upon the men of Yehuda to my standard and report here, va'ata po amod, and report here 3 days from now. So David says, I want you to gather the troops, bring them back here in 3 days, so we can start preparing the battle that we're going to wage against Sheva ben Bichri. Verse 5, Vayelech Amasa lehaz'ik et Yehuda. Amasa goes to fulfill the task of gathering the people of Yehuda. Vayocher min hamoed asher ye'ado. But he took longer than the time set for him. So basically, the text tells us he was late and he was unsuccessful at accomplishing the king's first task, a very basic task of gathering the troops. Now, why is the text telling this to us? What do we think about this? So it could be that Amasa is maybe being lax and lazy and not being fully loyal to David. But I would bet against that, only because A, we don't have so much of an indication about that, number one, although I'll come back to that. Or number two is that I think it's more on the people. I think Amasa, knowing what happened to Avshalom, wants very much to please David. The problem is that A, the people are not very responsive to Amasa, because let's not forget, Amasa just led the rebellion of Avshalom. So now David wants Amasa, the leader of the rebellion, to gather his own people. The people are like, I don't listen to you, right? And this is David's mistake, right? In that he took someone else's, the rebellion to lead the people, but he didn't have a pulse on the people because the people don't want to follow Amasa. That's number one. In their eyes, they may have very much gravitated towards Yoav. Absolutely, no question. So the people are not so willing to come with him. Number two, it may very well be that Amasa is inept. Amasa may not be the right person for this job. Amasa was the chief general of Avshalom, but that could be because they were a rebellion. He didn't necessarily, may not have been qualified for this job. Right, and therefore the text might actually be telling us David put someone in who really wasn't qualified to handle the job. And he did it for political reasons, but ignored the reality of the situation, which is Amasa is not worthy to be in that position. Yoav is a much better leader of the army. Now, basically Amasa fails at his first task. So we got to see what happens to Amasa. What Regine suggested, I think, is going to happen at the end to Amasa. Verse 6, Vayomer David el Avishai. So David now, when realizing that Amasa is late and it's not working, goes to plan B. Who does he call upon for plan B? Well, he can't call upon Yoav because he already demoted him, basically. So who does he go to? He goes to the next best guy he thinks he's able to without having to go to Yoav. That's Yoav's brother, Avishai, who he has a close relationship with and who has been a very aggressive individual. So David says to Avishai, Ata yera lanu Sheva ben Bichri me Avshalom. He says Sheva ben Bichri can cause us more trouble than Avshalom. Don't underestimate him. Ata kach et avdei adonecha urdof acharav. Now, right away, take the servants of your master, meaning my servants, urdof acharav, and chase after him. Pen matzalo arim betzurot vehitzil enenu, lest he come to fortify himself in certain cities and he eludes us. So it's ironic that David is using whose plan that was supposed to be used against him. He's using it against Sheva ben Bichri. Not Avshalom, Achitophel. Remember when David was on the run, Achitophel said to Avshalom, go get him, now. Don't let him settle. When you let David settle, it's over. And Avshalom didn't listen. Well, David understands that very well. And he tells Avishai, we cannot allow Sheva ben Bichri to settle. If he gets his people and he gets fortified and he settles himself, we're going to have a really hard time with him. He's going to be more formidable than what Avshalom was. We have to get him now while he's on the run before he has a chance to settle it. And that's what he calls upon Avishai to do. And that's why he's so upset that Amasa was unable to do his job in the time frame that was allotted to him, because time is of the essence for David. Verse 7, Vayetzeu acharav anshe Yoav. Interestingly enough, Avishai gathers the men of Yoav, right? And Avishai is his brother, to lead the way. And by the way, who's going to come with him? Yoav is going to come with him, because Yoav in this situation puts his own feelings aside for David to do what he believes is right. Yoav, as we've illustrated many times, when David is up, Yoav is down. When David is down, Yoav is up. David is making a number of missteps over here. His character is not at the peak of where we would want it to be. He's taking a lot of side things into consideration and not the main thing into consideration. Yoav, on the other hand, understands. Even though Yoav should turn around and say, I'm not helping David. He just demoted me from my job for no reason. I did the right thing and he took away my position. Yoav is going to go anyway as a private citizen to go and to help the stop the rebellion against David, because he knows what the right thing is to do. You see here the moral standing of Yoav. At certain points, Yoav is a very conflicting character for us because we've seen him at his worst, but this is one example of when we see him at his best. So Yoav and his men go the Hakreti v'Hapleti together with the Kereti and Peleti, different mercenaries that they have, v'chol Giborim and all the strong warriors of David. Vayetzeu mirushalayim lirdof acharei Sheva ben Bichri, and they all leave the city of Jerusalem to chase after Sheva ben Bichri and his men. Verse 8. Hem im ha'even hagdola asher beGiv'on. They found themselves near the great stone of Giv'on. Va'amasa ba lefnehem. All of a sudden, Amasa appears before them. Now, Amasa right now, his job really should be to do what? He should be gathering people, but apparently he failed at that. All of a sudden, he finds himself in a very odd place. He's in Giv'on, not in Yerushalayim. Why is he in Giv'on? Bizarre. Potentially. Which side of the action does he want a part of? So it's the contention. He went back, right? It's the contention, and we'll see that Yoav picks up on this because you're going to see what Yoav's about to do, right? But Amasa potentially switched again when he realized he was in over his head, and the people of Yehudah did not want to listen to him and follow him. He realized this is a dead end for me. If I continue to linger with David, I'm getting nowhere. So it's possible Amasa, and I'd like to go with this reading, changed teams again. He went back to be with Sheva ben Bichri, and he once again is ready to rebel against David. But he has something working for him, because at this point right now, people still think he's on David's side, but really he's on the other side, right? So now he can kind of play a little bit of a espionage type role. So the Amasa ba lefnehem, Amasa comes in front of them, but who's not fooled? Who never gets? Yoav's not fooled. Yoav knows. The Yoav hagur midol levusho. Yoav's been there before. He's seen this before. Now, he did this one time before. We're going to get to it. But he did this one time before when he shouldn't have. But Yoav is very suspicious of everybody. He's not somebody who trusts anybody. But Yoav hagur midol levusho. Yoav is wearing his military garb. Ve'alav hagor herev mitzumedet al motnav v'ta'ara, with his sword girded over it and fastened around his waist. V'hu yatsa v'tipol. And as he stepped forward, his sword falls out, meaning his sword is ready to be drawn. But Amasa does not realize it. Vayomen Yoav la'Amasa. Yoav says to Amasa, Hashalom ata ahi? Is there peace upon you, my brother? Vatohez yad yamin Yoav bizkan Amasa linshoklo. Yoav grabs the beard of Amasa in a way that gives the impression that he's going to bring him in to kiss him, to hug him in a non-aggressive way. Verse 10, Amasa lo nishmar b'cherev. Amasa was not on his guard with the sword having fallen out. Asher biyad Yoav, seeing that the sword was in the hand of Yoav. And Yoav takes the sword, vayakehu ba el ha'omesh. He sticks the sword and he drives it into his stomach. Vayishpoch me'av arza. And he brings all of his innards to the ground. Velo shana lo vayamot. He didn't even have to hit him a second time. He dies. That's the thrust and the power that Yoav has. He's no slouch. Yoav va'avishai ahiv radaf ahare Sheva ben Bichri. Yoav, no sooner than he kills Amasa, he moves on. Him and Abishai, together with their men, run to go and to catch Sheva ben Bichri. Yoav picks up on the fact that Amasa is not a loyal guy, is not trustworthy, he's not sure the role that he's playing, and boom, he hits right to Amasa. In his mind, he feels David has made a terrible mistake appointing Amasa instead of him. He does not believe that Amasa is loyal to David. Yoav, despite being demoted, is loyal to David, and therefore goes out of his way to kill Amasa. Okay? Now, this murder or killing of Yoav to Amasa should resemble another murder that Yoav did earlier in the book. Does anybody remember who it was? He killed somebody in a very similar way. He killed Avner. You remember Avner? Good. So if we rewind just for a moment back to the very beginning of the book of Shemuel, when David was trying to unite the kingdom together, right? And he was contending with Ishbosheth, Shaul's son. And Ishbosheth had a general by the name of Avner ben Ner. And Avner was causing a lot of grief to Yoav and to his men. Avner killed Yoav's brother, Asael. Gave him warning. Julie's correct. Yes. They did that play fight by the lake, right? And they were chasing each other and it got out of hand. And at one point, Asael, who was Yoav's brother, very fleet of foot, is chasing Avner. And Avner is on the run. And Avner is telling him, stop chasing me, turn away. He doesn't listen. Stop chasing me, turn away. I'm going to kill you. And eventually, Avner has to kill Asael out of self-defense. Yoav does not take to this very well. Avner, in the meantime, goes to David and says, I gave up on Ishbosheth. I want to be on your team. And David is very happy about this because David's all about uniting the kingdom together. He welcomes Avner in with open arms, gives him a task to do. He's willing to accept Avner into his camp. Yoav is not. Yoav is suspicious of Avner, but it's more really about a personal agenda. He's upset. He killed his brother. Yoav gets Avner in an alleyway. He pretends to be his friend, does exactly the same thing, drives the sword into his stomach, kills Avner. Now that causes David a lot of trouble, a lot of problems, because then David now has to go through this whole program in which he shows everybody he did not order the death of Avner. He embraced Avner. Yoav went rogue, and he did his own thing. So that was one of Yoav's low points, David's high points, because what Yoav did was unjustified. Avner was sincere. Avner was capable. David was right for accepting Avner, and Avner was not wrong for killing Asael. Asael was chasing him. So Yoav was wrong in that situation. Here, the roles are totally reversed. David is wrong for putting Amasa in to be the general instead of Yoav. Yoav should not have been demoted. His request was an unreasonable request not to kill Absalom. As a result, Yoav has no choice now but to take it out on Amasa justifiably, because Amasa is not loyal to David and is not worthy to be the general. So Yoav has to kill Amasa because he needs Amasa out of the way. And so while these murders or killings look the same, they're very, very different. In one situation, Yoav was out of line. In this situation, Yoav is very much in line. He's doing it to protect the loyalty of David. Why do I bring all of that up? Because, I'm going to ask you to flip again, when David is about to die, and he gives instructions to his son Shlomo to take revenge against Yoav. David is going to instruct Shlomo to do away with Yoav, because Yoav committed crimes against David. What crimes did he commit? So I'm going to ask you to turn now to the very first chapter of the book of Melachim. Go to the book of Kings. We're looking a little bit ahead over here, but look to the first chapter of the book of Melachim. Actually, is it the first chapter or potentially the second? I apologize, the second chapter. Go to chapter 2. Let's see where he talks about Yoav over here. Go to, and you're in the Sachs Hebrew English, you can go to page 793, chapter 2, verse 31 of the book of Kings. Chapter 2, verse 31. Okay? The king is trying to figure out what to do with his Yoav problem. He's got a problem, Yoav. Yoav eventually changes teams himself. He goes to a rebellion against David. He joins David's other son by the name of Adoniah. We'll get there, right? It says, "Vayomer lo hamelech aseh ka'asher diber ufga bo ukvarto." The king tells him, "I want you to kill Yoav." "V'hasiroti demei chinam asher shafach Yoav me'alai u'me'al bet avi." And by doing so, you will remove the innocent blood which Yoav spilled from me and from the house of my father. This is Shlomo telling them to kill Yoav. V'heshiv Adonai et damo al rosho, and God will place his blood upon his head. Asher paga b'shnei anashim, because Yoav killed two people, tzaddikim, righteous people, v'tovim mimenu, better people than him. V'yahargem b'cherev, and he killed them with the sword. Ve'avi David lo yada, my father David did not know at the time that he killed them. Who did he kill? Et Avner ben Ner. That was the first time. Sar Seva Yisrael, the chief general of Israel. Ve'et Amasa ben Yeter, and he killed Amasa, Sar Seva Yehuda. So Shlomo eventually gives a command to one of his loyalists. His name is Benayahu ben Yehoyada, to kill Yoav because Yoav spilled the blood of two righteous, innocent people who didn't deserve to die, Avner and Amasa. But that's in Shlomo's mind. In Shlomo's mind, and based on what he was told from his father, Amasa and Avner were both righteous. But I think we might contend that those two are actually not the same. The killing of Avner, that Shlomo is correct about. That was vengeance. It was vengeance, it was deceit, and it was misplaced. In the case of Amasa, we could argue that Yoav did the right thing. In David's eyes, maybe he didn't, because David's eyes, he looked like, you're jealous of Amasa because I put him in place, and blah, blah, blah. But us as the reader, we think that maybe he did. So it's true. I will accept that you could read it differently. I will accept that you could read it that Yoav was simply jealous of Amasa, that he had taken over for him, and Yoav felt Amasa out of the way would be easier for him, right? Maybe to restore his position or give his brother the position or something like that. It could be that there's both motivations. It could be that Yoav is somebody who's it's not foreign for him to have multiple motivations. Maybe he felt this was the right thing for David, but also in his heart of hearts, he had it out for Amasa as well. I'm not discounting the possibility there. But for me, why Amasa is there, why the text tells us about Amasa's ineptitude, how the text is portraying David in this chapter as making a few missteps, leads me to feel like this murder is not the same. I don't even want to call it murder, that this killing is not the same as what it came about with Avner. That's just my approach to reading. but I cannot say definitively that's the only way to read it, right? And so you could argue that the way David looked at it in the end and passed it down to Shlomo, maybe that is the correct way. But I think maybe there might be a nigiut badava. They might be a little biased in looking at it that way. But in reality, we could justify this killing on the part of Yoav. There's two sides to the coin. Yeah.
You know, we understand that everyone knows that Shalom was about it. But that was the number one transgression of Yoav in David's eyes. The one thing he said is, "Don't kill my son, don't kill my son." So why are they saying that Yoav is guilty of these two things without David's permission? And how could you not mention Absalom?
You're saying how come David, Right. So my answer to that would probably be, if you look at the language that David used at the beginning of Melachim, what he's upset about is that Yoav killed innocent blood and righteous blood. I don't think even David, as much as he said not to kill Avshalom, he himself cannot, with a clean conscience, call Avshalom's blood innocent and righteous, right? So I think in the end of the day, even David came around to the idea that while Yoav disobeyed what he said, he cannot take Yoav's life in vengeance over killing Avshalom, given who Avshalom was, and David realizes that. But he can be upset for killing Avner and Amasa, who in his mind he felt were innocent and did not deserve to be killed. That was because of Yoav's suspicion and his jealousy and his other things. What did you say? Who, David? Potentially. That's one way to look at it. Yeah. Okay. We are in chapter 11. We're in chapter 20, Pasuk 11, verse 11, Pasuk Yud Aleph. Now, where we at right now is they're chasing Sheva ben Bichri in his rebellion. And at the moment, Amasa is lying dead in the middle of the road. And we're going to get a little bit of a graphic next couple of Pasukim, just to give you a sense of what they feel about Amasa, what the people feel about Amasa. The Ish Amad Alav Mina'are Yoav, the people in Yoav's, the what? Yeah, David's people, the ones who are following Yoav to squash the rebellion. When Amasa wanted him to come. Yeah. In the end of the day, now we'll get a good glimpse of what they really thought about him, which is probably why he wasn't successful in his job. V'ish amad alav mina'are Yoav. After this happened, a young lad, a henchman of Yoav's camp, got up and vayomer, and he said, Mi asher hafetz beYoav, umi asher leDavid ahar Yoav. Whoever is in favor of Yoav and whoever is on David's side, follow Yoav. So the people are very clear about who they want to lead them. They want Yoav to lead them. This just gives rise again to the idea that David perhaps did not have his pulse on the true sentiments of the people. While this is all happening, while Amasa lays in the middle of the road, drenched in his blood, mitgolel badam means he's steeped in blood, betoch hamsila, in the middle of the road. Vayar ha'ish ki amad kol ha'am, and the man sees that because Amasa's body is in the road, people cannot move on, they cannot walking, right? Vayasevet Amasa min hamsila hasadeh, so he drags Yoav's body. I shouldn't say Vayasev means he removed. They dragged or removed Amasa's body from the way, hasadeh, into the field. Vayashlech alav beged, and he cast upon it a garment, ka'asher ra'a kol haba alav ve'amad, because he saw everybody was stopping in the way and was not going onwards, holding up traffic. That's the extent of Amasa's body over here. Absolutely. Verse 13. Ka'asher hoga min ha'mesila, once he was removed from the road, avar kol ish acharei Yoav, everybody continued to follow in pursuit of Yoav, lirdov acharei Sheva ben Bichri, to chase after Sheva ben Bichri. So essentially, what does Amasa mean to these people? Nothing, right? He means nothing. They want him out of the way so that he won't block the traffic. That's how much the people cared about Amasa. Essentially, Amasa, both in life and in death, was merely a roadblock to the people of accomplishing what they needed to accomplish, which is squashing the rebellion of Sheva ben Bichri. The text does not give a lot of sympathy to Amasa in this situation. Verse 14, Vaya'avor b'chol shivtei Yisrael avera ubet ma'acha v'chol haberim vayikahalu vayavo af aharav. So Sheva had passed through all of the tribes of Israel, Sheva ben Bichri, he crossed all of the tribes of Israel up to Abel of Bet Ma'acha, and the Be'eri assembled and followed him inside. So it seems as though Sheva ben Bichri is able to fortify himself into one city together with a group of men, but he's stuck now. And now we have Yoav leading the people, so we don't have any weakness. And so now Yoav's got the upper hand. Sheva ben Bichri is caught inside of the city and inside the walls of the city, and he's a sitting duck, basically. So what does Yoav plan to do? Yoav plans to destroy this entire city so that he can get to Sheva ben Bichri. And a woman is going to help preserve this city and to get rid of the rebellion with the least amount of bloodshed, which, again, the men have no problem, it seems, wiping out entire groups of people. And again, it is a woman who comes up to try and find a way, a solution to the problem to minimize the amount of bloodshed. And thankfully, in this situation, the man listens to the woman, right? Verse 15. ויבואו ויצורו עליו באבלה בית מעכה, וישפכו סוללה אל העיר. Yoav's men came and besieged him in Avel of Bet Ma'acha. They threw up a solela. Solela is some kind of like a rampart, or they have a siege mound against the city. Basically, they put all the dirt up and they created a situation where Sheva ben Bichri cannot escape. He can't get out. But ta'amod b'hel, and it stood against the rampart of the city. V'chol ha'am asher et Yoav mashchitim lahapila homa. And all the troops of Yoav are ready to engage in battering down the wall to get in and obliterate the city. Verse 16. Vatikra isha hachama min ha'ir. When all of a sudden, a very clever woman shouted from the city, Shim'u, Shim'u, hear, oh hear, Imru na el Yoav, go speak to Yoav, Kerav adhenna, bring him close to the wall, to where we are, Va'adabera elecha, and I will speak to him, right? Okay. So the woman wants to have a meeting, private, with Yoav. And she's going to try to give him some advice. Verse 17, Vaykrav eleha, Yoav is found, he comes close. Vatomer ha'isha, the woman says, Ha'ata Yoav, are you Yoav? Vayomer ani, she says, yes. He says, yes, I'm Yoav. Vatomer lo, she says to him, Shema divrei amatecha, listen to the words of your maidservant. So she's humbled before him. Vayomer shomea anochi, he says, I'm listening. Vatomer lemor, she says to him as follows, Daber yidaberu barishona lemor. In olden times, people used to say, Sha'ol yisha'alu be'avel v'chen hitamu. Inquire and ask advice from the people of Avel, and that was the end of the matter. In other words, we are a city of very wise people. We are a very important city in Am Yisrael. There is a reputation that this city has, that when people have problems, they come to our city, they investigate their problems, and we offer them answers, which means it's not in your best interest to destroy this city. Anochi shelume emune Israel. I am one of those who seek the welfare of the faithful of Israel. I'm looking out for the peace of the Jewish people. Ata mevakesh lehamit ir ve'em be'Israel. You are seeking to bring death upon a mother city of the Jewish people. Lama tevala nahalat Adonai. Why should you destroy the Lord's possessions? So you see this woman, again, she's described as an Isha Hachama, a wise and clever woman, speaks logically, rationally to Yoav. You can see that there's a lot of arichut, there's a lot of lengthiness in her conversation that the text does not typically do. She says to him, or who are you? He says, I'm Yoav, tell them this, tell them that. There's like a back and forth over here, which I think the text drags out to display the cleverness of the woman. She knows that Yoav is a very what? What's Yoav's? He's arrogant to a degree, but what's his other very main character flaw? He's very impulsive, good, aggressive, right? He kills first, asks later, right? And hence his people have the same type of mentality. They got to the city, their first thing is batter it down, wipe them dead, get rid of everybody. They shoot first, ask later. That's their MO, in keeping with Yoav. And you could see why soldiers, by the way, love that mentality. Guys, brutish soldiers love that type of mentality. We want to kill, that's the mindset that they're in. Kill first, ask later. That's where their head is at. this woman, the length of the conversation is to calm Yoav down, is to get him out of that aggressive mindset, kind of lull him a little bit before giving him the advice. Once he's, taken it down a couple of notches, his ears are open to some level of rationality, because Yoav doesn't seem to be, his impulsiveness sometimes clouds his rationality. What are we going to say? We do not have a name for her. Correct. All right. Well, it actually is reminiscent of another situation in which we had a very wise woman who was not given a name that we read about a few chapters ago. Does anybody remember when that came to play? Just a few chapters ago. It was like chapter 14, but it's been like a month, so hard to remember. There was a woman called Isha HaTekoit. So do you remember when Yoav? Correct. Very good. Yes. See, it always comes back the minute I say. Exactly. Beautiful. In chapter 14, Yoav wants to bring Avshalom back from exile, knowing that David is pining over Avshalom. And he sends this woman, and Isha from Tekoa, who's described as a wise woman, also not given a name, to give this mashal in front of David about what's going on with her sons, and one son killed the other. Now the family wants her to kill the other son, and so on and so forth, to sort of illustrate to David why he should bring Avshalom back and why it doesn't pay for him to keep Avshalom over there in exile. Turns out it's a very poor decision in the end of the day, because Avshalom ends up rebelling against his father because he couldn't fully embrace it. In any event, this is very similar here as well. Two stories about Yoav engaging, both stories have Yoav engaging with the wise woman, but again, both stories have very different outcomes. The story of Yoav engaging the first time was to manipulate David to bring back Avshalom, catastrophic results. Here we have the woman who engages Yoav, initiates with Yoav, and that has great results, because Yoav now is going to pull his people back. They're going to give up Sheva ben Bichri. The rebellion's going to end, and only one person had to die. Who's the one person? Sheva ben Bichri is the only guy who had to die. This whole rebellion, and only one person ends up dying, right? Which is, in all things considered, a win for us. Exactly. So different stories, and there's a clear contrast here of what's going on. Here, Yoav is able to take the advice, because again, Yoav in these chapters is a protagonist for us. Vayan Yoav vayomar. Yoav responds to her and says, Chalila halilani. Far be it from me, it will be a desecration for me, im avala v'im ashchit, if I were to destroy or to ruin. Lochen hadavar, this is not what I intend to do. Ki ish mehar Ephraim Sheva ben Bichri shemo. All I seek out is that there's a man from the tribe of from the mountains of Ephraim, which is the tribe of Binyamin. I know that's confusing, but they're called the mountains of Ephraim, but because they extend as a range, but it starts in there's from Binyamin. His name is Sheva ben Bichri. Nasa yado b'melech David. He raised his hand up against the king David. Tenu oto levado. Give him up to us. Ve'elecha me'al ha'ir. And we will leave. We won't have to kill anybody else. Tomer ha'isha el Yoav. The woman says to Yoav, Hine rosho mushlach elecha. Behold, his head is cast before you, be'ad ha'choma, on the other side of the wall. Yani, he's a gunner, right? But tavo ha'isha el kol ha'am, the woman very cleverly goes to the people within the city, be'chochmata, using her wisdom. Vayichretu et rosh Sheva ben Bichri, they chop off the head of Sheva ben Bichri, vayashlichu el Yoav, and they send it over the wall to Yoav, vayitka b'shofar, and Yoav blows the shofar, vayafutzu me'al ha'ir ish le'ohalav, and everybody returns back home. The game is over. The rebellion is done. If Sheva's gone, we don't have anything to worry about. The Yoav shav Yerushalayim el hamelech, and Yoav returns to Yerushalayim, to the king. And you can imagine the surprise of the king to see Yoav back in the fold, having led the destruction of the rebellion of Sheva ben Bichri. Interesting here, Yoav, again, playing the foil game. After he killed Avner, back in the early part of the book, he also blew the shofar. But that shofar blow was in tragedy over the fact that he was ending this play fight, which killed hundreds of people unnecessarily. Here, Yoav, in the protagonist chapters that he has, is able to blow the shofar, having avoided the bloodshed. So back then, he blew the shofar, having caused bloodshed. Now he's blowing the shofar, having avoided bloodshed because he was willing to listen to the advice of the Isha Hachama. Questions? Okay, so that's where we stand. The second rebellion has now been destroyed. And we don't even really get David's reaction to the fact that the rebellion is gone. It just dissipates. It never really got off the ground, as I mentioned before. There never seemed to be a lot of fear because they went and they attacked it right off the bat. But like I said, the seeds have been sown. Now here, to conclude the chapter, we'll just take another minute or two, the chapter does something strange. It basically does a summation of David's kingdom, which is usually done when the time of a king is over, right? So watch these next few pasukim. Ve'yoav el kol hatzava Yisrael. Yoav was the commander of the whole army of Israel. Apparently, he was reinstated at one point. Ubnaya ben Yehoyada ala Kereti ve'ala Peleti. And Benayahu, the son of Yehoyada, was the other commander. He was in charge of the mercenaries, the Kereti and the Peleti. Va'adoram al Hamas, a man by the name of Adoram, was in charge of the forced labor, the taxes. The Yehoshaphat ben Achilud Hamazkir. And Yehoshaphat, the son of Achilud, was the royal recorder. He recorded the events. Ushva Sofer, a man by the name of Sheva, was the king's scribe. V'tzadok ve'Evyatar Kohanim. Tzadok and Evyatar were the priests. V'gam Ira haya'iri hayat kohen David. Ira from the Ya'iri was also served as a priest for David. Generally speaking, this structure is seen when you're sort of wrapping up a king's tenure, when you're ready to end and sort of move on to somebody else, which is strange because we're not at the end of the book of Shemuel Bet. There's about 4 more chapters left, right? So one thing we're going to have to answer as we go into these next chapters to conclude the book of Shemuel is why did the narrator of the book of Shemuel decide to sort of put a ribbon on the kingdom of David now at the end of chapter 20, when there's still 4 more chapters left to go and stories to be told a little bit afterwards. It might seem to suggest that the stories that we're about to read are more like epilogues for David's kingdom. In other words, we've covered at this point the essence of David's Melucha. We've covered the major stories that we need, the rebellions, the fallout from the Sheva, from the Bathsheba story. By the way, we never really pointed out how ironic it is that David's sin with Bathsheba leads to a rebellion with Sheva ben Bichri, right? So there's all these different webs and connections that are kind of connecting to each other. But basically, we've covered the tenure, the Melucha of David. And for all intents and purposes, David is now going to ride out his days and get ready to pass the Melucha on to Shlomo. This wrapping up sort of gives us the idea that his tenure is over, but there's still some more information, almost like an epilogue that we need to be aware of before we're ready to turn over the kingdom to Shlomo, and under what context is Shlomo taking over the reins. And in fact, there's still 1 more rebellion left for David to contend with. That's going to be the first chapter of the book of Melachim, the book of Kings, where one of his sons rebels and tries to take the kingdom by force instead of passing it on to Shlomo on the very last days of David's life as he's sick and sort of ready to depart. So there's definitely more we need to cover. We'll hopefully double back to some of these Pesukim to try and explain why there's like a little bit of a break here. But first, we'll just cover those chapters themselves and then see how it plays with the rest of what we did. Questions, comments, thoughts? So I'm not so sure I'm comfortable. I'm not so sure I'm so comfortable 100% giving that description. I think David is a very relatable character because he does a lot of things correct. He also makes a number of mistakes. We've noted many times that his ability to admit his mistakes is his major claim to fame. But David has to contend with a lot of different things, political situations, family situations. He did not have it easy. His life is quite a bit of suffering. Now you understand when you read the book of Tehillim, and David is always talking about this terrible life that he led. You're wondering, like, what could be so terrible about David's life? He was the king. No, it was a terrible life. David is throughout his tenure chaste, has to contend with a lot of different people who have a lot of different motives. He has to make all these decisions. And I'm not so sure we would make very different decisions than David would make. I definitely would not judge David necessarily from a bird's eye view, because when you're in there and you got to make political decisions and family decisions, you could understand why David decided to choose a lot of the things that he did. That he did. I don't agree with that. I think the people respected him, but there were times in which he made certain decisions that went well for him, where he had a pulse on the people. And there were some other times when he struggled to get a pulse on the people, and he allowed other concerns and other motives to get in the way, to maybe cloud his judgment a little bit on what was the right thing to do, which is natural for a king. Sometimes a king has difficult decisions to make, doesn't always have all the information that he needs, or sometimes it's clouded by other things that cause him to make bad decisions. That's part of being a king. Nobody's going to make perfect decisions. Some of that loyalty was on them. Some of that loyalty is on David and his decision making. And we're going to see troubles with Shlomo. Shlomo is going to have some major golden periods. He builds the Beit HaMikdash. Everything's great. And then he's going to struggle. And there's going to be some challenges that he's going to incur with the people. Being a king is a roller coaster ride. It's never straightforward and smooth. I'm going to leave that to others. Enjoy, everybody. Have a great day.